Well, we are learning a few more details about what happened that led to last week's shooting death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. It involved a prop revolver, and as you know, it happened during the filming of the Alec Baldwin Western Rust. It has the screen industry now looking at the future of gun use on sets.
Industry safety standards ban live ammunition from movie sets. Instead, many sets will use blank cartridges, which still have gunpowder to simulate the sound and smoke, but no bullet. As armorer, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was responsible for preparing those prop guns. A Rust actor telling ABC News Gutierrez-Reed was always very professional on set and took her job seriously. But a member of the camera crew describes a set rife with safety concerns.
The production company behind that film, which has been paused, says it is now conducting an internal review. Well, let's bring on Daniel Levinson. He is the owner of Rapier Wit in Toronto and has a lot of experience with being on film sets. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
I know you've been performing, you direct, you teach stage combat professionally. What went through your mind when you learned about this story?
Well, my heart just sunk. I mean, sadly, this is not the first event that we know of, and it always shocks me every time I hear it because it seems so unnecessary and surprising because there are really intelligent structures in place to protect crew members, performers, and in the case of live performance, audience from such things. And when I hear these events occur, I don't have words because it seems mind-boggling to me that it happens.
Could this happen? And I think that's one of the big questions people have is when we're talking about a prop gun, why is there even, or how is there even an opportunity that live rounds are in that gun?
Well, let me speak about from our position in Canada. It simply couldn't happen. I mean, that sounds like a very broad statement, but the license I have that allows me to use firearms in theater and film precludes me from having live ammunition, meaning the difference between, of course, live ammunition and blanks is really the projectile. And so I cannot imagine ever having a reason for live ammunition on set or even having it in your possession. And unlike some of the stories we've been hearing, and again, I should be cautious because I can only speak to what I've read as you have or heard from the press, that the idea of having live ammunition in these firearms to practice with between filming is just something we would not do.
Something we wouldn't do in Canada.
No.
Right. Because even that, I think, seems so strange that's even something that would be done on a film set, that using prop guns for that kind of thing in between takes or in some downtime, just I think, and again, looking at it through that Canadian lens, just seems so odd.
Absolutely. And I have a number of friends who, across the United States, who work in the industry, and it really is very different between state to state. And even though the provinces may have differences in how certain things we approach, the criminal laws are all the same, the firearm laws are all the same, and anyone I know who works in the industry in Canada really approaches it in the same way as safety that we feel would preclude such an event from happening.
Would a prop gun in Canada still be capable of firing live rounds, or can something be done to those guns that stops them from even being used in that way?
Well, the firearm that I understand was used in this particular example was a revolver, and to make the firearm work, you wouldn't actually have to change it for firing blanks. The reason why I bring that up is in the case of more modern firearms, self-loading pistols, things have to be done to allow them to cycle so that you can fire around and have the spent brass thrown out and the next blank to go in. So those have to be altered to allow you to use them. And then, of course, there's also blank replicas that are made only to fire blanks and wouldn't be able to allow someone to put a round in. The issue that I think some people come about with things that are real firearms that haven't been altered is a fear of altering might in some way weaken or damage the metallurgy of the firearm. Now, people have different feelings about this, but that's one of the things that might be a concern. And so the rules that keep people safe about never pointing the firearm at a human being or at an object that you don't wish to hit, like if you were firing target shooting with real rounds at a target, that's something else entirely. But on set, the safeties we would go through if using a real firearm that has not been altered would be, one, you wouldn't point it at someone. And you have to remember also that revolvers, there's space around the cylinder and there's actually hot gases that come out as opposed to a modern pistol. So you have to have an awareness of all of that area, not just the end of the muzzle. And because of it, there's really strict rules about distancing between people, the locations of crew and cast, and just the let's use the word trickery we can use with camera to allow us to have a very impactful image and yet still keep people safe.
Right. And sorry, go ahead.
And I was going to say, so a lot of people questioning why we're using real firearms at all. Part of it is that, yes, there are replicas out there. The issue is, what do we want them to do? So, for instance, I have some solid rubber replicas that are terrific for only pointing or dropping, and they can't do a thing. But if the action demands an actor cycle or create the illusion of that they're loading or unloading the firearm or cocking the hammer, then obviously we need something else. And there are airsoft or replica firearms that do not fire that you can use. But again, and speaking because I also work in theater, the impact on an audience when used properly, where the sound and the texture and even the smell of the blank can alter the environment of the room. And if that's what you're looking for, it might be appropriate to use a blank gun. So the answer, I would say, is using the proper tools for the job. And I would only use blank firing firearms if that was exactly what was needed. If it was just a question of something in the hand of an actor, there's other choices.
Right. And I think that's too one of the questions that has come up. And I was looking at it wondering, because so I have my gun license, and I guess I come to it from that perspective, in that I would never assume a gun is unloaded. One of the first rules you learn is that you always check and you make sure. And I was curious if, when using real firearms on movie sets, if there are those same rules, if any of the same rules as just kind of regular gun ownership, if they come into play.
We certainly start from the same place you went through to get your PAL. And if I was lucky enough to work with you on a set, what I would do before the event was I would show you the firearm and I would open it if it was a revolver, or I would show you if it was a pistol or a rifle, whatever. I'd open the action and allow you to see either that it was empty because there wasn't supposed to be anything in it, or the number of blanks in it because you're in a scene where you're actually going to be firing. But I would take that time, and I'm pleased to say that I've never been on a set where I wasn't allowed that time to make sure that everyone was aware and that this was the safety step we were going to take. Another thing would be that I wouldn't load a firearm and just place it on a table and then walk away from it. The idea of once you put the blank inside the firearm, you're really responsible for it, and that's where it would go from my hand to the performer's hand. I think that would be perhaps the strangest thing for people who use firearm for sport or for hunting, that really the thought of giving someone a loaded firearm it goes against nature. But because of how filming works, and sadly many performers don't have much firearm training, the placement of a gun into someone's hand in a very controlled way happens all the time on a set. But well, I should say but in my ideal world, I would have actors training, as you did, to get your PAL, for no other reason than to give them a really healthy respect and understanding of what firearms are and what dangerous they are.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly one of the questions out there. Do you think this will lead to changes? I know one production company, I think it was The Rookie, sent out a letter saying they're now changing their policy when it comes to having prop weapons and how that's done on set. Others, I know there are others on the set of Rust saying that they believe that this was negligence and this could have easily been prevented. Do you think it will lead to policy changes, or should?
I think it may. The problem with should, I guess, and this may make me out of step with some people, is that I believe in giving artists the most amount of tools to achieve the desired end. And so earlier I said the appropriate prop for the appropriate event. We also do a great deal of sword work, and so I have swords made of steel and swords made of aluminum and swords made of rubber, and they do different things for different tasks. And there's a performance quality that Fire in the Blank may give a performer that people may argue with me about this, that would be perhaps a greater sense of urgency and believability. If it's unnecessary, then people won't. I think that, to sum it all up, my fear is always to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And there are times, particularly with historical files, where it's really difficult to find the object people seek because there are no alternatives except for either real or solid rubber replicas. And you can imagine that if you are watching a war horse and you're watching the actor move the action, it's likely going to be a real firearm.
Right. Okay. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your expertise today and talking more about this. A very important conversation to have. Thank you so much for joining us.
A great pleasure. Thank you for having me.